In this video, we are going to discuss bias in sampling. So I do already have these filled out. So if you feel like I'm going through it too fast, make sure you pause, write down the information that you needed, and if you need to listen to the explanations, you can. So first here, sources of bias in sampling. First of all, the goal of sampling is to obtain information about a population through a sample, and we want that sample to give us an idea about what is going on in the population. If the results of the sample are not representative of the population, then the sample has bias. So if the sample that we are choosing is not representing what population we're studying, then it has bias. And we have three sources of bias in sampling. We have sampling bias, non-response bias, and response bias. So going into those in a little bit more detail, sampling bias means that the technique used to obtain the individuals to be in the sample tends to favor one part of the population over another. So there is bias because of how we sampled. So that would be like me wanting to know something about all the math students in our building, and I do a random sample with my students only. That is not a true representative of all math students in the building, because you have elementary, junior high, and other high school math teachers. Undercoverage results in sampling bias. So undercoverage occurs when the proportion of one segment of the population is lower in a sample than it is in the population. So, for example, say 65% of Marian Tech College students are female. If we survey a sample and our sample has only 40% of our entire sample being female, then the females represented is only 40%, so that is under coverage. All right, so if in our sample, if only 40% of our sample is females compared to our population of 65% being females, then that would be an example of undercoverage. Some other examples of that is Literacy Digest. They unsuccessfully predicted the winner of the presidential election in 1936, which was Roosevelt versus Landon, because they pulled their subscribers, telephone directories, and automobile owners. Well, it turns out that most Republicans were in that list. So, per the survey, it favored Landon, but it was mostly made up of Republicans and not a lot of Democrats that were a part of those things. Another thing is that telephone surveys may not be valid. Several reasons. You're assuming that everyone has a phone, and you're discounting those people that don't own a phone. And also think about, when you get a survey call on the telephone, how likely are you to answer it when you don't know what that number is? You don't know whose number that is. So we kind of run into that issue as well. So frames are not always easy to obtain. When they are, it's hard to keep them up to date. So remember, a frame is a list of everyone in your population that you are studying. So an example there is a list of registered voters. Say, for example, I get a list of all registered voters in Ohio today, and I'm going to send out a survey to a random sample of them. Well, if I'm not ready to send out that survey until next week or even later than that, it's very likely that there were people who registered to vote between the time that I got my frame and the time that I sent out the survey. And also, it's not going to be the easiest thing for me to obtain a list of all the people who are registered to vote. I'm probably going to have to go through some other people and some jumps and hoops to get that list. That kind of goes with everything. A list of a lot of things. Next, we have non-response bias. That exists when individuals selected to be in the sample do not respond to the survey, have different opinions from those who do. Non-response can be improved through the use of callbacks and rewards and incentives. So, for example, the Literacy Digest mailed out more than 10 million questionnaires and received 2.3 million responses. That's only a 23% response rate if you take 2.3 million divided by 10 million. That's a very low response rate. So they just did not receive a large amount of responses. How we can improve non-response bias, one way is try surveying again. So you can try a different method. Maybe if you originally mailed out a response, you could go face to face, or maybe try mail. You could also change the time of the survey. So if you were already calling people to ask, maybe call and ask at a different time. Second thing you can do is offer an incentive, and there's pros and cons to this. But for example, you could offer, money to take a survey, or a lot of times you'll see if you take the survey, you'll be entered to win a drawing for an iPad, whatever it is. I feel like a lot of times, like restaurants, you're asked to fill out a quick survey and they'll give you a free menu item. So earn a free Big Mac if you fill out the survey for us, or a free Frosty. You see those quite often. And then third, explain how the information can be used. So if you're given a survey, explain why you're given that survey and what the purpose of it is. And the person that you want to take it, they might have interest in helping out with whatever you're trying to accomplish, so they might be more likely to fill out the survey for you. The third type of bias we have is response bias. That exists when the answers on a survey do not reflect the true feelings of the respondent. So we have different types of response bias. One could be an interview error. So to help avoid that, you need a trained third-party interviewer. So if a company is interviewing people about something specific, instead of someone within that company being the one creating the questions and interviewing, it is best to have someone who's not part of the company, doesn't have interest in what you are studying, and they need to be trained in how to interview. That can help because a good interviewer can elicit responses and make them feel comfortable to give truthful answers. So good interviewers know how to ask questions in a way that people understand and can answer appropriately, and they trust that person enough to give them a truthful response. Another type of response bias is misrepresented answers. So people tend to inflate answers for certain things. So for example, if you're asked your salary, you might inflate that or round up. A lot of the times, you're asked roughly how much do you make when you go to get pre-approved for a loan, for a house or a car or something like that. And they just want, an average annual income. And so people might not know that they make exactly $48,532 a year, but they're gonna be like, okay, I make about $50,000, and then maybe they have a side job like coaching, and they know they make a few, maybe like 2,000 and something, so they round up to 3. So now we're at 53,000. So they might say they make 53,000 a year when really it's more, 51,500. But they just round it up as they were kind of doing their estimate. So people can inflate their answers, but people can also underreport answers based on what the question is. So if you're being asked about your weight, people might tend to round down on that and say, I only weigh 140 instead of 145. Okay, you're not going to round up, and that can affect the surveys. People tend also to overestimate their abilities. So maybe think if someone asked me, how fast can you run a mile? Well, at one point in my life, I could run a mile in 7 minutes. So I might say, oh yeah, I could probably run that in 7.5 minutes, when in reality, If I haven't ran a mile for 12 years, I probably can't run that mile in that same amount of time. So I'm overestimating my ability to do that. Third here is the wording of questions. So we need neutral and balanced questions. So you need questions to be worded in a way that it's not persuading someone to answer in a certain way. So just make sure that questions are neutral, and that's why having somebody help create questions, if you're a company, to survey instead of coming up with them yourself is also important. The ordering of questions or words, that also plays a role because it can impact the answers that are chosen. Maybe a question might be asked early on and then a different question is asked later, but the way they answered it the first time impacts the way that they answer it later on. Also, people tend to choose earlier choices. So if you're given 5 options to choose from, you might read the first couple and think, oh yeah, that applies to me, and you choose that one. Whereas maybe there was a better option that you would have chosen in the later options if you had actually read through the entire thing. And then another type of response bias here is the type of question. So you have open questions, which allows the respondent to choose his or her response. So that would be like an essay question where you're asked a question, you can write down what you think. The issue with that is that the person conducting the survey, you're going to get too many different possible answers back as responses, and it would be really hard to maybe categorize those or group those and decipher through them. A closed question is where the respondent chooses from a predetermined list of responses. So that would be like multiple choice. The problem with that is that you're forced to pick a choice, even if maybe your choice isn't on that list of options. So one thing that might be recommended to do is conduct a pre-survey that has open questions to figure out what popular answer choices are, and then use those popular answer choices to put on to an actual survey, and then you can kind of reduce and simplify your data and responses there. And then last, not really a result response bias, but data entry error leads to results that are not representative of the population. So if you're typing in the data or responses that you receive and you accidentally type in something incorrectly, that's going to affect the results. So it is important to make sure that it's being checked for accuracy, that everything was typed in correctly. So not even double checking, triple and quadruple checking, having other people check each other's work to make sure that data is entered correctly. All right, and even though a census is like a popular thing that's done, it can still have bias. So response bias, there could be confusing questions on the census, and there could also be non-response bias because you can't really include the homeless in a census. Census is typically mailed out and you are asked to return it. So you can have non-response bias by the homeless or just people, not paying attention to their mail and not participating. 2 types of errors we have are non-sampling and sampling. So a non-sampling error result from sampling bias, non-response bias, or data entry error. Such errors could also be present in a complete census of the population. And then sampling errors is an error that result from using a sample to estimate information about a population. This type of error occurs because a sample gives incomplete information about the entire population. So an extra note there, sampling errors, they are from using a sample to estimate the population, and then non-sampling errors are errors resulting from the survey process itself. So a way to find the sampling error is to take the statistic minus the parameter. If you remember, as you should, a statistic is data from the sample. The parameter is data from the population. So for this first example, Say you want to estimate the average starting salary for recent nursing graduates from Marian Technical College. The recent graduating class had 40 graduates. You conducted a simple random sample to select 8 students and found the average salary to be $59,052. Part A, assume that all students told the truth, so they knew their exact salary, they understood the question, and that the sampling methods were done correctly. What is the sampling error if you know the true average starting salary for the recent 40 nursing graduates is $53,715? Well, the population is all 40 nursing students. The sample would be the 8 that were randomly selected. So to find the sampling error, we take 59,000 minus 52, that's the statistic, minus the 53,715, that's the parameter, and that is equal to 5,337. So that would be the amount of our sampling error. So maybe just, we chose 8 students, we did what we could, they told the truth. Of those 8 students, they just happened to have a higher salary than the average of all 40 together. So what type of error would be present if you found out that one of the 8 students lied about his salary? Well, that would be a non-sampling error. That didn't have anything to do with how you got your sample. That would have to deal with the response of the person lying about their salary. All right, for examples 2 through 4, the survey does have bias. Part A, determine the type of bias, and Part B suggests a remedy or a way to fix that. So example 2, the village of Oakland wishes to conduct a study regarding the income level of households within the village. The village manager selects 10 homes in the southwest corner of the village and sends an interviewer to the homes to determine the household income. Well, this would be a sampling bias because they chose homes specifically in the southwest corner. Well, those may have different demographics than the others in the village. So in order to fix that, they could have used a simple random sampling instead, where maybe they gave each household a number and then randomly chose numbers to conduct their survey. Example 3, Cold Stone Creamery is considering opening a new store in O'Fallon. Before opening, the company wants to know the percentage of households in O'Fallon that regularly visit an ice cream shop. The market researcher obtains a list of households in O'Fallon, randomly selects 150 of them, and mails a questionnaire that asks about ice cream eating habits and flavor preferences. Of the 150 questionnaires mailed, 4 are returned. Well, hopefully you can see that this would be a non-response bias, because that is a very low response rate. Only less than 3% of people responded. So to help fix that, you could try sampling again, maybe using a different method, potentially not mailing. I know we're really bad about mail. We let it stack up for a while before we start going through it. Another option would be offering an incentive. So maybe offer 20% off their first visit, or a free, free ice cream cone, free milkshake, whatever it is, for Cold Stone in general. Even if they don't want to have one in their town, they might visit one somewhere else. So offering the incentive to help get responses. They could also go face-to-face interviews with a trained interviewer. So Cold Stone could hire a trained interviewer and have them go to the households. Example 4 here, to determine the public opinion of the police department. The police chief obtains a cluster sample of 15 census tracts within his jurisdiction and samples all households in the randomly selected tracts. Uniformed police officers go door to door to conduct the survey. Let's see. We got sampling bias, non-response bias. For this one, the respondents aren't likely to give truthful responses. One, it's a police officer coming to their house, and that might be a little intimidating. So they won't be quite sure how to answer the questions, and they're answering a question about the police department. So they might be a little persuasive. So this would be a response bias. So a way to fix that is to use a trained interviewer. So if you have a trained interviewer go and ask the questions, it's someone who's a third party. They're not part of the police department trying to find something out about the police department. And people might not be intimidated to answer the question in a certain way. So I guess I should add to that. All right. And last example here. Discuss the benefits of having trained interviewers. I feel like we've talked about that a few times here. You're going to get better survey results. They can elicit responses to difficult questions, so they can help people understand what the difficult questions are asking and to answer truthfully and correctly, or to answer what the question is asking, not what the question is asking. Part B, pros and cons of telephone interviews to take place during dinner time in the early evening. Well, a pro would be that you have a higher chance of making contact with individuals. A lot of people are home during dinner time, it's after work, getting ready to eat with the family. So you have a higher chance of getting someone to answer. The con of that would be people could get upset about being interrupted during their dinner time. That might be their only family time that they have. And so when that time is taken, they don't appreciate it. Why is a high response rate desired? How would a low response rate affect the survey results? I feel like this one's pretty self-explanatory. Higher response rate gives us better survey results that represent the entire population. A low response rate, you could have just segments of the population represented, so some underrepresented, or maybe individuals with strong opinions have participated. So if someone cares about what the survey is saying, they might be more likely to respond than not. And then part D, discuss why the order of the questions or choices with a questionnaire are important. In sample surveys, changing the order helps prevent bias due to previous question answers or situations where respondents are more likely to pick earlier choices. So if you mix it up a little bit, you're just going to get different responses from everybody, and it would make a more accurate survey. And there you have bias in sampling.